Broadcasting live worldwide. Welcome.
Are you ready? Welcome. Señoras y señores, welcome.
A Diálogo con Luis Otero. So welcome to everyone to a new edition, a new episode of Dialogo with Luis Otero. This is your host, Luis Otero, and thank you so much for everyone that they've been listening to the podcast. It's been a great pleasure and honor just to launch this platform, and I appreciate everyone that have downloaded the podcast. Over 55,000 downloads in the past few weeks, and we're growing in through all the social media platforms, YouTube, Dailymotion, on the visual side, and we're over 18 platforms all around the world. You can listen to us in iHeartRadio, Stitcher.com, Apple, Spotify, and TuneIn Radio, and many other platforms. And definitely, we appreciate so much you taking the time to listen to us and to allow us to come to your lives, and for taking the time to listen to this amazing content and amazing podcast. Again, you can follow us in our Instagram and Twitter at Dialogo con Otero, and you can as well definitely reach out to us through all the platforms where we're at. Today we have a tremendous episode and a tremendous show, and I gotta say that I'm extremely excited and extremely honored to have this amazing guest with us. This guest that we're gonna have today, it doesn't need any introduction, but I have definitely looked up to him, and I really have followed his career since I was a young kid, since 1999, when he impacted the world doing a tremendous piece. And I think that one of the biggest and amazing pieces in music and video from the history of heavy metal music. He directed the groundbreaking video album from Slipknot, Welcome to Our Neighborhood. And not only that, but he have a tremendous career as a director of music videos, feature films, commercials. He have worked with people like Ozzy Osbourne, Mudvayne, Slipknot, System of a Down, Megadeth, Cradle Of Filth, Sepultura. I think one of the best and biggest, robust rosters of amazing musicians and creating amazing work. He debuted as a feature film director in 2010 with the movie On the Doll, and it's for me an extreme pleasure to have today the one and only, the amazing director, writer, producer, Thomas Mignone. Great pleasure to have you. Welcome to Dialogo with Luis Otero, Thomas. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. It's a tremendous honor to have you.
I'm doing great, Luis. It's really nice to have you here.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I'm really excited to speak with you, Thomas. I really have looked up to you for many, many, many years. Your work is truly outstanding, and we're going to have a great chat of your career, but the amazing work that you're doing with a new project that you're going to be announcing pretty soon in our conversation. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Thomas, you're in LA today, definitely in one of those crazy busy days, like every single day that you have in your career. But a lot of people that they're listening, obviously they have seen your work. I really grew up seeing your work with, the likes of Slipknot. Very big fan of Corey Taylor and the great guys of Slipknot. You did a lot of work. I think that you were the main video guy for them for most of their career and the greatest years of the band. And as well, great work with Mudvayne with the amazing song Dig and System of a Down. But how Thomas Mignone started, where he was born, where he was raised, how was his childhood, how he just created this emotion, had this great interest to be just a director of music videos that they just said, that made history. How Thomas started his career and when he was born. And if you can talk a little bit about your childhood and where you came from.
Sure. So I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I was raised by some very strict parents, along with 5 other siblings. My mom was Irish, and that made all my uncles and cousins cops, which even today they're still all cops. My dad's side was all Italian, a lot of Guido criminals. So, of course, that made for some very interesting family dynamics. Whenever there was a confirmation or a Holy Communion or some other, get together, it was always like half the guys on one side of the backyard were staring at the other guys on the other side saying, didn't I arrest that guy last week? But it did make for some very interesting memories of like which uncle was going to be having his feet stuck out of the shrubs, drunk off his ass next, and then, of course, as I got a little older, I was keenly interested in the stories my cop relatives would tell me about. They were mostly vice cops in Times Square, in Harlem, in South Bronx. And I would ride along in their squad cars and see the pictures of some of them as detectives. And it was just a very, very colorful storytelling experiences I had.
Wow, it's incredible because they cover all the boroughs in the family. You had the ones like covering Times Square, obviously, Harlem and all the boroughs. So you're from the East Coast. I initially, so it's interesting because you have done a lot of work in the West Coast because that's where the industry is. But you're originally from the East Coast. How do you, from New York, being born and raised, in a very diverse family with a lot of relatives from Irish descendants to Italian, you decided to say, hey, I'm gonna be I like music, I like directing, I would love to be a music video director, because your resume is just, oh my God, it's one of the best or the most incredible resumes and careers that I have seen in your area of work. How you decided to just become a music video director, coming from a family that doesn't have that entertainment or I should say like movie industry background.
Sure. My dad had an engineering firm in Brooklyn. And I went to engineering school in upstate New York. I received an electrical engineering degree from a school called Rensselaer, and RPI is a very prestigious college for engineering.
Correct. Yeah.
I graduated and then went to Silicon Valley to work as a circuit designer.
Wow.
My design engineer specializing was in an area called digital signal processing, which over the years has been very helpful for my role as a director, because the equipment and all of the facilities now are very sophisticated and technical.
Correct.
My work as an electrical design engineer was very challenging, but I kind of noticed, and really I'm a dork and a nerd at heart. But, working in a large laboratory surrounded by 100 other nerdy guys, it never really inspired me. And I've always loved film and music. So I eventually moved to Los Angeles to chase that dream. And when I got there, I learned right quick that being a production assistant really just meant you get pizzas for people. And I failed miserably at that. Never had quite the right amount of pepperoni or sausage, and it's horrible. But then I started, working with artists like, a lot of them were punk artists, Firehose, Husker Du,
wow,
Descendants, Black Flag. These were really, really cool, intense artists. They didn't have a whole lot of money, but they were very fearless.
Yeah.
And they allowed me to try a lot of new ideas. Sometimes I would get paid in original Watchmen comics that were signed by Alan Moore or Dave Gibbons, but they didn't have money, but they gave me Watchmen comics, and I loved Watchmen, so I still have them all to this day.
Awesome.
I directed videos for alternative artists like the Toadies, Seven Mary 3, Tonic, Sister Hazel. These were happening bands that were getting a lot of MTV attention. I've directed hip-hop artists like Deepable Planets and Cool Keith. Wow. He was the guy who wrote that very prolific line, "Smack My Bitch Up," which became a big hit.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I started to really lock into some really intense musical artists, like you mentioned, Slipknot, Mudvayne, System, Ozzy, Avenged Sevenfold. all of those, but of course, some other really, really cool artists like Paul D'Amour, for instance, from the band Tool. And these artists had a lot of things that they felt were important to say. Bands like Obituary really wanted to, you know, bring attention to environmental devastation of the Florida swamplands, or Death Angel or Suicide Silence. I was really intrigued and inspired by artists that really had something important that they were trying to say. And conversely, these artists were really wanting to work with a director that truly understood their music, one who would put the same amount of time and thoughtfulness into the videos that they were actually putting into the recording of their music. And I've always had an affinity and a respect for artists that were willing to push the envelopes and convention with music, because it would allow me to do the same thing visually with their music videos. And like you mentioned before, you know, guys like Corey and Clown from Slipknot, or Phil from Pantera, certainly Serge and Chavo from System, even guys like Ozzy, of course, Danzig, they really weren't afraid to push limits. And this convinced me that this was the direction I really needed to go in with my life.
I agree. And what the work that you have created with the likes of like Ozzy, Sepultura, Slipknot, System of a Down, Mudvayne, all the names that you mentioned, including the Toadies, that was in 1995, 1996, you know, Possum Kingdom, you know, and Away and Tyler, and all those, you know, video shorts, you were creating something extremely special, because I think that there were not directors at that time. I feel that they were pushing the boundaries, and I felt when I basically saw your work for the first time, you know, and I gotta say, and I did, my parents, they might not even know this story, but in 1999, when I saw Welcome to Our Neighborhood, you know, I remember seeing that piece of work, and it was just phenomenal. It really impacted my life moving forward, of just like how, you know, a video album should be. And I think that you were one of them at the same time, because you were directing. Yes, they had their role. They were creative. They were really creating and pushing limits all over, you know. But I feel that if you were not in the picture, this great work that you did with all these amazing bands, including Mudvayne and Avenged Sevenfold and all the other that you mentioned, would not have been possible if you really were not envisioning or putting, you know, on visual, you know, directing the videos and the work like they have wanted, or they have created the same impact if it wasn't for you. Do you really ever thought in the process of just, you know, creating this amazing body of work, you know, with all these amazing names that at some point they were like the rebels of the music industry, do you thought that it was going to be such a remarkable feedback? And not only that, but that material still very refreshing this day, where a lot of the new directors like Gil Green or Ulises or Jesse Terrero, they have get inspiration for their work. Do you really thought at that point that you were creating something, you know, that special when you were creating this work with all these amazing bands and artists at the time?
Well, it's a really intriguing question, Luis. And I got to tell you, like, Slipknot was, in my opinion, like unlike any other artist I ever worked with. You know, the way they featured anonymity and the intensity of their lyrics and their musicianship. I really believe they have a passion for their music that's second to none. And it's funny, I got a call one day from a friend at Roadrunner Records, and Roadrunner at the time was like one of the preeminent metal labels out there.
And he's one of the biggest independents, you know, still to this day. They had Nickelback, but they had Slipknot. Very different kind of like, you know, lines of music, but Roadrunner is a very well-respected label to this day, yeah.
Yes, and so this buddy who was head of the creative department, all he did was give me an address, and he said, go there with your cameraman. And so I tried to get a little more info out of him, and he wouldn't give me any. He said, just trust me. And of course I did trust him as my friend. And so next thing you know, I'm, you know, find myself sitting in a rented van in the middle of some landfill in the middle of nowhere. And my cameraman's got his camera with a long lens on it and a bunch of loaded up magazines with 16 millimeter film. And we're just sitting there and waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally it's like, what the fuck? And we're just about ready to bail. But then all of a sudden there's a couple of cars that pull up from like across the landfill. and these guys get out wearing coveralls and some really hideous masks.
Wow.
And they've got sledgehammers and some homemade flamethrower, and they're smashing and torching things like broken down washing machines and mannequins that they position on couches. And I'm telling my cameraman, just roll the fucking camera. Whatever happens, just keep rolling. So he does. And then suddenly a handful of police squad cars pull up and they start cuffing the guys. And my buddy and I are like, we should just get out of here now. But then suddenly the cops start uncuffing them and the cops leave. And we're completely confused, but we're still rolling film. And then we see these freaking psychopaths start walking towards us. And I'm thinking, we're just going to end up getting killed, and they're going to actually find me and some various pieces of Samsonite luggage, which I know that would really disappoint my parents. But the guys come up to the van, and all they say is, "Did you get that?" And that was like the first time I ever filmed Slipknot. And
Wow.
Clown said to me, "Look, if you were just some pussy and you ran away, we wouldn't work together. But because you stayed and you hung out, and we know that you're right." So and that, of course, led to Spit It Out and Surfacing. And those were the original footage. And then finally that really, really intense song ever that I ever heard called Wait and Bleed,
Wow.
which
That's
I think
a
was
classic.
nominated for
Yeah.
a Grammy.
Yeah.
And after that, it was like the door just opened for me to work with all these other really wonderful, incredible metal hard rock bands.
It's incredible because to get that kind of like introduction to just a historical band from Des Moines, Iowa, that's where Slipknot is from, and have Sean Crahan the Clown that just to tell you exactly, hey, if you were a pussy, we will not have worked with you. That's a definitely tremendous introduction, but I feel that they really the music of them in 1995. I think that's where their demos started just to get a lot of the attention, and that's where the emergence in 1996, 97, around that time. That's when a lot of the visual work started to come. 1999 was the year where the amazing piece that you created, Welcome to Our Neighborhood. How that groundbreaking video album, because it debuted #1 in Billboard, have sold over 200,000 copies, went Ria Gold like just in weeks after it was released. You were the director of this amazing piece of work that still it's just have created a cult following, and you were breaking boundaries all around the world with this video album, because everyone is typically like ready just to listen to a music album, but just to get a video album is very groundbreaking in an era where video albums were not even traditional. Do you really, how was the process? Because I got a lot of questions from that time. How was the process of working with such an amazing band? A lot of egos and a lot of like creativity from these guys, but putting this amazing piece together that still it's just essential to all the heavy metal, fans and heavy metal followers and people that they respect that genre. How was the, that amazing process to create such an amazing work?
Well, I had worked with a bunch of metal artists before that. And a lot of those, I shot Ozfest for many years, and I shot guys like Dave Mustaine and very, very cool bands like Death Angel. Wow. And Obituary and Life of Agony. And a lot of these bands, the Knot, they related to me as a director, because I had worked with artists that had were pushing the envelope already. Yeah. And so connecting with them just seemed to be a natural extension.
Wow. It's just, I feel that at some point you were the guy, to do all the videos from the industry. I think that, at some point I saw your name, and I remember watching, being a vivid, viewer of MTV, and seeing you with Slipknot, seeing you with Sepultura, seeing you, and that was Infused, seeing you with System of a Down, seeing you with Ozzy, seeing you with so many names like American Head Charge, Obituary, like Kitty, that there was a very untraditional, there were women. There were women. It was a, metal band that there were women, and just seeing the Dirty Hit, work that you did, like, do I feel that you were that guy to go in 90s and 2000s and still, where all the metal and, rock guys, and including hip hop, felt very comfortable working with. I don't even find another name with so many credits. Do you really expected that, the beginning of just working, with all those names, that where they were coming, like the Toadies, do you expected that it was going to take this ripple effect where it was going to turn, taking this amazing journey for like decades? Because it seems that you've been working in music, but then after that, you have been juggling music, feature film. Do you expect that it was going to be this big at this point?
No, honestly, it was just, a passion for what you love to do. And, it was just following that burning passion in your heart. When I worked with Sepultura, I was very close. I mean, Max is virtually a brother to me. And when we did Roots, the one thing that he said is, let's make this different. Let's not follow the convention, and rather than showcase typical metal types of vibes, which are always kind of dark and shadowy and kind of very subdued. Roots was all about, capoeiras and timbaladas and the real natural beauty of Brazil.
Yeah.
And that kind of differentiation really allowed the visual aesthetic to kind of grow and change. Dig was a really, really wonderful example of that. On the heels of Wait and Bleed, Mudvayne was, doing some opening shows for the Knot. And, when I met Chad and Gerg and, these guys said, we want something different. How do we differentiate ourselves? And we decided, rather than just keep this convention of the dark brooding kind of thing, what if we just flipped it on its, completely did a dichotomy, and we wanted to showcase it with, very vibrant, super saturated colors that had a very clean white backdrop instead of the darkness. We put Chad in a chair, which we literally restrained him in for over, 12 hours just to get that 1 13-second shot during the bridge, which we had a single frame and stop motion it, just to get his head to crack and his throat to slit in the exact right way. And it, ultimately became a signature piece for the band. And that opened up a lot of doors to, other artists that wanted to now sort of explore a much more strikingly vibrant, eye-popping aesthetic.
Of course. Yeah. Dig was amazing.
After Dig's success, Serge from System got a hold of me. System's on the same label as Mudvayne. And he said he really loved the look of Dig, and he wanted to go with a similar aesthetic with Toxicity, which I really loved,
It was impressive. The Dig was impressive. There were like 9 different camera angles, there were a lot of angles there, extremely vibrant, brightly lit, It was amazing because it allowed the viewers to just see the different band members, in the music video. Plus, this was awarded as this, the song won like best music video. This was the MTV2 award, in 2001 that you are the architecture, of this, you're the engineer behind all this, that amazing piece. And I think this was one of the first music videos where a heavy metal artist like Mudvayne worked with vibrant colors, So I think that after that, you changed the game. It was like a before Dig and after Dig. That's where a lot of people that have said, because this was part of their debut studio album, LD50. And I think that it really bring a lot of value to their career because it became a staple for the band for all the years that they performed. So I feel that, you contributed a lot into that, and then after those years of, just as an example, working with Mudvayne and all these artists, how, Thomas, you decided to say, hey, I really want to go and jump and, grow my career and as well do feature film? Because I see, like an example, other directors that they stay as music video directors, and they tend not to jump sometimes or take the risk to do a feature film or become directors as well of feature films. You decided to do that. How do you really felt, hey, I don't know if this is gonna work. I'm gonna throw myself and do it because I have a lot of confidence in myself and my work that I have done, and I feel that this is gonna be easy for me. It was easy, the transition between just being groundbreaking music video and creator director to just becoming a feature film director? Did the transition was easy for you?
Well, most of my music videos feature very strong conceptual storylines. I'm a writer at heart.
Yeah.
I love to write. And while the record companies would want like a one-page treatment of what's the video going to be like, how are they going to see the band, I would write 12, 15, 20 pages of the conceptual storyline that I would derive out of the lyrics. I would find what I feel is the most compelling or interesting or unique lyrics of the song, and then I would script a conceptual storyline around that. And I have a real respect for artists that are truly talented in their craft. And so I would a lot of times put actors from the feature film world into the music videos I did to portray the characters of the conceptual storylines. For instance, you mentioned earlier American Head Charge. Rick Rubin, this was his first signing on American, and he wanted something really fucking intense.
Yeah.
And the most intense actor out there that I knew was a guy named Mike Rooker, who was, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. And the band loved this guy, and he was perfect for the storyline. Mike is the blue-faced guy from Guardians of the Galaxy, and he's, going to be the nemesis now in the upcoming Fast and Furious. So his career has really exponentially taken off. But that's a good example of, working with narrative conceptual videos and actors that are accomplished, which formed, I think, a natural transition for me into the feature film world.
And I feel that you started creating video shorts, when nobody was doing it. Nobody was doing it. Like an example, I told you Posthume Kingdom was a video short in 1995, and then you see, I see the Third World Chaos with Sepultura, and I see a lot of video shorts. An example, Wait and Bleed was a video short, 1999, and I remember, Dig was like a documentary short too, or like a video short too. So I feel that you were prepping yourself, creating these amazing stories, breaking ground, being different, creating the shock effect on the audience. But at the same time, I think that you were grooming yourself to just do that big step of just becoming a feature film director, because at the end of the day, you're creating stories and you're directing stories. And that's what happened in 2010 when you directed the amazing feature film that I still feel that is extremely, and it's even more relevant today than in 2010, On the Doll, starring Brittany Snow and Candice Acol and Angela Serafan and Clint Crawford, a tremendous movie that really got tremendous, reviews from the festival circuit. But it touches a tremendously provocative topic that is extremely important to talk these days, because I feel that the movie, you created the fact that everyone was talking about, everyone wanted. Basically, you were touching base about victims of sexual abuse. And all this year, I think that movie is more relevant now after what has been going on, and all the victims coming out from the entertainment industry and many industries now than in 2010. And it's still very relevant. I think that that's a movie that I always say, it should be relaunched again, because it really can make such an impact now in the society, because it really touched this topic that not a lot of people like to talk about, that is, sexual abuse. Do that was intentionally your view when you decided to take this project in 2010 and just create that very impactful kind of like scenes and impactful and bring that impactful message to the audience, correct?
Yes. So when you mentioned Toadies earlier, for instance, the Possum Kingdom video, the singer for the Toadies, Vaden, explained to me that when he was a kid, they would camp, and his uncles would tell him these horrific stories of abuse and horror stories. And when he got older, he discovered that they just made it all up. So it's actually, if you listen to the lyrics, it's a lot about deception and the roots, the notion of On the Doll is kind of rooted in the fact that back in the Toadies video, we have this imagery that shows what looks like someone doing something really horrific to a person out in the middle of the woods with a body bag, and it's very, very provocative. Yet at the end, we see that the subject is really just crafting a beautiful ice sculpture of a woman and the artistry of that. So it kind of flips the switch on what was your brain thinking. So now when we fast forward a bunch of years to, and by the way, with the Toadies video, something really funny happened with that. One of the editors who was doing some assembly cutting for me lost one of the tapes of a rough cut.
Wow.
Which then getting in the hands of the Dallas police, who thought it was a snuff film and wanted to chase down what was going on. It looked like a murder on camera. And so that actually got a lot of wonderful press for the project, and ultimately it got a lot more MTV play. But it was, a hit song, bona fide hit. And I loved the ability to generate a conceptual storyline that touched upon things that we inherently think might be abusive. Now, when you fast forward to, I was living with a girlfriend who had a bunch of her friends that would convey these rather abusive stories that they were experiencing at the hands of others.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, the abuse is physical, of course, but sometimes it can also be very mental and emotional. And they all had to deal with it in their own ways. Brittany's character was kind of distinguished for not actually keeping quiet about it or just rolling over and being abused. She stood up instead and brutally attacked those who had abused her. And the interesting thing was that at different festival screenings, there were a lot of women in the audience. Many of them were like moms and daughters who had heard about the film, read about it, and they spoke out at the Q&As about kind of how accurately the emotions of an abused woman were portrayed and how they were glad that I was able to depict it accurately.
I feel this movie is just amazing. It is amazing.
The relevance to where we are in today's world seems to resonate well with the themes and tone of that film. In fact, that film is now, I think, was recently added on Amazon. So that was kind of cool to see that, because it does resonate with today's audiences and what society is kind of going through right now.
I am very glad that they put it in, in Amazon as a platform, because it is extremely relevant, and it's going to be relevant forever, because it's a topic that it's like taboo. Not a lot of people like to talk about it, but when they talk about it, a lot of people tend to just identify themselves, because everyone have a life, everyone have a childhood, everyone have just experiences of abuse in some kind of way, and just bringing that piece and putting that piece and directing that movie with such a great cast, I think that makes this movie just extremely relevant for years to come, and more relevant, I feel, sometimes even now with, all this movement and all these victims coming out. I feel that definitely it resonates still with our society in our area. So that's one of the things that I have seen with your work, and I gotta highlight this, because a lot of people in the as directors, they tend sometimes to do movies or work that is just for their living. I feel that your work never expires, or your work never, it looks fresh for years. And it's something that I just got to highlight, because your work in the music side of things, with, being a music video director, with the names that we have mentioned previously in the interview, and just an example with this movie, with this feature film in 2010 that you did on the doll, that I told everyone that is basically, listening to the interview, please go to Amazon and watch this movie, because it's a great movie directed by Thomas. I feel that your work looks very fresh after years. Do you really? I feel that you're a visionary when we're going to talk about work and creating, content like this. Do you really do it purposely, or it comes just as natural already, nature of you of creating, stories, that's how you, been what you've been doing for many years?
Well, thank you for the kind words. It's really nice to hear, Luis, that you recognize that. Certainly, the production team that I have, in particular, cinematographer department and production design. These visual aesthetics all kind of have to work in synergy with each other. We spend weeks and weeks and weeks breaking down every scene that the script that I write gets broken down very, very many times. And then we put shot lists together, and we think of camera dynamics and angles and production design elements that are going to really kind of hone in on what is the emotional tone of a scene. Even to me, music is always going to be a very important characteristic of film. Paul D'Amour from Tool is my composer. He composed the original score on the doll. Wow. We sat down and we developed certain themes, musical themes for each character, and then we would mix those themes in before the next scene, so that you start to almost subconsciously and inherently you start thinking, you hear something, and then it sort of segues in to what is happening next in the film, and it starts to feel very seamless. But a lot of the attributes that you mentioned about how something feels fresh or compelling is really attributed to the hard work of the cinematographer and the production designer, and even the producers who get down and make sure that everything that is needed on set to have the right emotion and have the right time to be able to tell the story correctly is provided.
No, definitely. And I feel that there's a team behind it, and obviously there's a lot of components, but as a director, you got to be the one just providing those directions, and just it have to be extremely rewarding when you see a work like this and having just such a great team behind you, to be able to put, work that it's going to live forever. And it basically looks fresh 10, 15, 20 years. After that, it's going to be like 10 years since the release of On the Doll, and still relevant. Not a lot of directors have that kind of special touch in things, or work or projects that they do. So I got to commend you for that, because not a lot have that kind of touch. And talking about amazing touch, there's this amazing new project that you're working, The Latin of Manhattan. It's just an interesting movie, that you're directing based on the life of the adult film star Vanessa Del Rio, and with a tremendous roster of actors and actresses: Jesse Metcalfe, S.I. Morales, Drea Di Matteo, Terry Manning, David Proval, Elizabeth Rodriguez, and Vivian Lamoli. That it will be the actress just interpreting, or acting as the vivacious Vanessa Del Rio. Talk to me a little bit about this project. I'm kind of very interested after they told me about it. I'm like, I want to talk to Thomas about this, because it looks that it's going to be another great movie directed by you.
Well, I had the opportunity to meet Vanessa at a book signing. There's a very prestigious book company called Taschen, and there was a very fun party that they threw at, I believe it was the Playboy Mansion. And so I had a chance to meet with Vanessa and I kind of got the vibe that she grew up in the same world that my uncles and cousins were talking about in Times Square back in the day.
Correct. Yeah.
A lot of her story side was very different than what I had heard. For instance, she would say how, my uncles would say, oh, we busted in on these guys. They were all, making some adult film, and we didn't even let them get their clothes on. We just threw them in the paddy wagon and arrested them. It was, and then she would say how, we were in private property and these guys would come busting in. They didn't even give us the decency of putting some clothes on, and they just arrested us. And then, the obscenity rules would never stick. And I was getting two sides of the same story. And the more I researched it, the more I realized there's a really, really interesting conflict that resonates very much with today's world and society. And that was about the inherent hypocrisy of people in power and things happening back then with the swinging out of the very liberal 70s into the much more conservative 80s emulates today a societal switch and shift in mores. And so I wrote the script, and I was blessed with having her tell me, she's had 100 guys come at her after, over the years, but no one else seemed to get the fact that Vanessa is a true feminist, even though a lot of times feminists look at the adult industry as something that objectifies women and therefore they dislike it. In Vanessa's case, what distinguished her was the fact that she was a true feminist. She never put up with any BS from anybody. She wouldn't allow herself to be victimized, and she wouldn't allow herself to be treated misogynistically. So this was a very distinguishing characteristic for me as far as a story point, and it seemed to be a progression and a natural one from some of the other films that I did that featured, very strong, sexy, confident women, and the inherent hypocrisy of, if you or I go out and bang 100 chicks, man, we're considered studs and really cool. But if our girlfriend or our wife was sleeping with 100 guys, I mean, she's the lowest whore slut on the planet. And that seemed to be a hypocrisy to me. And Vanessa, back in her day, was very proudly and strongly standing up for herself. In fact, her favorite word, she'll tell you, is slut, because it elicits such a strong emotion, and it definitely pushes people's buttons one way or the other. But she had a very, call me whatever you want, but don't treat me with misogyny because I won't tolerate it. And that just seemed like a very important topic to depict in a movie. We don't see a lot of films today with strong female characters as protagonists. We see a lot of adorable, sexy, gorgeous women as eye candy on, the elbow or arm of the lead guy, but rarely do we see, a very sexy, confident woman who's able to, stand up for herself and demand the same level of respect that her counterparts get. And that's what distinguished her story for me. And that's what caused me to want to put this film together. And certainly, when I went to my friends, like, for instance, Taryn Manning from Orange is the New Black, a very powerful actress, in my opinion. Yeah. She was, portrayed a very, sort of a sympathetic character in films like Hustle and Flow or 8 Mile. But, there's an inner strength to her that I think is very, very powerful. And when she jumped on board, that caused Drea, who's equally strong as a strong female in series like Sopranos or Sons of Anarchy.
Correct.
And then guys like Isai.
Isai Morales.
He's an amazing actor on Ozark, and certainly, back in the La Bamba days and everything he's done in between. He's just a powerful presence. And that brought on, of course, Elizabeth, who I loved in Logan as the very forthright, mom character. Dave Proval from, Shawshank and, series like Sopranos. I mean, these are very, award-winning actors. Jesse Metcalf, I can't say enough about him. He's got more grit and guts in his performance than I've ever seen before. And, and working with him was a very, very enlightening experience, in that he brought such a powerfully evoking emotions type of character to the screen. And all of this together, is fueling, I think, a very important moment in our society's depiction of women, depiction of ethnic characters, and trying to, say that it's okay for women to be proud of who they are, and proud of their sexuality. And just because you are wearing that on your sleeve, that doesn't really give anybody the right to disparage you or put you down. I know there's a lot of emphasis nowadays on the rights and people advocating for the rights of sex workers, for instance.
Correct.
And this is something that needs to be addressed. They work as hard as any other person in any other industry, yet for some reason they are treated, poorly. And I think those types of things, you have a new group of very powerful, very confident women rising up in all facets of society that are saying this is BS, and we're not going to put up with it, and nor should they.
I agree completely with you, Thomas. I feel that Vanessa, just to talk about the movie and just to be echo to what you said, I feel Vanessa was an activist in her time. She retired in the 80s from her career in the adult film industry, but I still feel that her legacy still lives. And I think even more because in the 80s it was a very tough time for her industry with the AIDS and many other scares in regards of like what was going on at the time. But I feel completely, and I can agree even more than what you said. I feel that there's like, yes, I'm an actress, or I am a actor in Hollywood, or I work in Hollywood, and there's like the adult industry that they still work hard, that they still obviously act, that they still are employees in that industry. And I feel that they're right sometimes, or I would say, there's not sometimes organizations that protect those workers, because I have heard the stories or read the stories in mainstream media and or even other, sources where I see that, oh yeah, I spent like 5 years in the adult film industry, and I don't receive royalties from my work, where there's obviously mainstream work, or not mainstream work, but I should say like, work that is more commercial. Definitely there are guilds or there are organizations that they, they're there to protect you as a worker. And I feel that there's still a lot of work to be done, obviously, in the adult film industry. And obviously, I think that, with this cast, you're going to put a tremendous piece that I feel is going to be not only a hit, but it will be something that is gonna like leave a very impactful message, like you have always done with your work. You feel this movie is gonna be as well a very good example of like, the shock effect and how, you're gonna present it to the audience, correct?
Well, one thing I would like to mention, Luis, is that while this film is on its surface reflecting the story of a woman in a very tumultuous world, the changing societal mores, in particular in Times Square, and across in all the different cities and society in general. The bigger picture behind the scene for me is something that really has never been portrayed or depicted, and at least in the films I've seen, and in any way kind of accurately, and that is, and you touched upon this, the fear mongering, and the just this side of legal manipulations that the federal government and the local authorities utilized with regards to the AIDS epidemic in order to serve their own agenda. This is really the crux of the story that you learn while you follow Vanessa's story. Because what happens is, the 70s were in economic decline, not unlike, 10 years or so ago for us, when things started to swing very conservatively. And you had a President Reagan come in, and you had guys like Giuliani going from district attorney to, from district attorney to, let's say, mayor.
Correct.
And the directive was, we need to rebuild our economy. Well, how are we going to do this? Times Square is a perfect epicenter for this. And so they used the fear-mongering of this very frightening disease in order to force out all these legitimate businesses. If you were selling stereos like down in Times Square, and that speaker that you have hanging outside your shop is the same one that's in one of the Peep booths, well, you could get AIDS in the Peep booth. So maybe you could get AIDS listening to music from that speaker. Or if you sold shoes to a hooker and hookers get AIDS, well, maybe if a mom comes in with a kid in a stroller looking to buy shoes, she could get AIDS. This is what they were saying back then, and this is what they were instilling in people's minds. Why? In order to force all of these legitimate businesses out, in order to bring in big monoliths like Disney, like ESPN, like Viacom, which of course blew up Times Square and made the real estate super valuable, and it's a much nicer place today. But at what cost to legitimate people, all under the auspices of eminent domain that your shoe business or your stereo shop or has to go in order to serve the public good. And that story kind of draped around Vanessa just happened to be in the right place at the right time to kind of navigate through all these machinations of that kind of much bigger story. Makes for a very compelling conflict. And that's what really attracted me about it.
No, and it still happens today. Even you mentioned, Times Square. It's still happening. An example very close to Times Square in an area called Newark, New Jersey. There's still that fight of we got to revitalize the area, and we got to let all these bars and all these places that they basically don't have the best reputation, just to through eminent domain, taking over, and people's lives, they get affected, and Vanessa obviously was in the middle of all this happening in New York, and her story is truly a movie, and you are the one in charge of creating this amazing piece, with Vanessa being the icon and in some way activist and trailblazer for the industry. What surprised you in the process to learn from her that nobody knew?
I interviewed her for 100 hours at least, Luis, before I wrote a single word.
Wow.
And I was really struck by how sharp her acumen was about what was going on back in the day, and the way she was able to convey that to me and then connect the dots to what was very vital and still critical to our society today. And so developing, just sitting and listening to her and the stories that she told about, the issues that she was having. She would do a show in New York, which was totally fine. She would go across the river to Jersey and do the same show, and she would get arrested for obscenity.
Wow.
And she would stand up in court and like the hypocrisy of the same judge who's slamming the gavel with one hand is jacking off to her with the other in private to her pictures, and that inherent hypocrisy just was really laser focused by what she was able to convey to me. And I think the film will address those things because we see a lot of that today, and it kind of needs to be part of the narrative in order to initiate change and improvements.
Of course, and I agree that definitely that's a very powerful line that you said about the judge. I feel sometimes that we see something, well, most of the time, by law enforcement and many other things, see something on the front and in the back is just a different story. So just putting that on the movie, that was challenging a little bit to find, that process of just putting that together and deliver the right message, the right words, keeping that essence, but at the same time, putting together those real life events without just, it was challenging sometimes as a director, Thomas, to find that line to say, okay, I think that this word should not be going in here. This one should be going in here in order to create the reaction. Do you find challenging that on this movie that you directed?
Well, I think it goes along the same trajectory of, working with the types of artists that I've always worked with and the types of actors that have stepped up to be a part of this. These are all, mainstream successful actors who were participating in a story that they think is relevant and important. And in the same way that, you work with an artist like a Slipknot or an Avenged Sevenfold or an Ozzy, like these are people who push the envelope. And so in this film, you've got, a protagonist who is pushing the envelope with the films that she's making, and certainly the production team that was making these films. Remember, this was when suddenly like VHS was happening, and now people could really explore subgenres and other types of subjects, but pushing the envelope nonetheless in the same way that, musicians did at this time when Vanessa was kind of coming up. You had the nascent hip hop and rap music styles being born, and lyrically what artists like NWA or Two Live Crew or certainly, Wu-Tang. I mean, they are all pushing the envelope in their own artistic ways that Vanessa and her crew was trying to do in the filmic world. And up until the 80s, there was a lot of synergy with mainstreamizing the adult world. You go to if you were lucky enough to go to the Deep Throat premiere, the red carpet premiere, practically, celebrated as a red carpet hit. Yeah. You were, yes, it was naughty, but it was kind of cool and hip to be doing that. And it wasn't until suddenly the finger of blame about the AIDS epidemic was pointed to the adult industry that became very uncool. And when you look behind the story and you see that this was a very orchestrated agenda by groups, the federal government, as well as, the local authorities, to create this sense to force these businesses out in order to raise the costs of the real estate and profit from it. That's really the story behind all of this, and that is really what's being portrayed.
Thomas, when we could expect this movie to be released? I'm really excited. I really want to see this movie so bad. When we should expect, and when the fans and when the audience can expect, to have the Latin of Manhattan release out there? You could give us a little details on that, or that's still in the works?
Sure. So I have been. We're wrapping up principal photography over the next 2 months.
Awesome.
I've been very meticulously trying to recreate and build a three-dimensional model of Times Square with visual effects. to accurately and authentically represent the way Times Square looked back in the day, because it would be impossibly expensive to rebuild that. So, for instance, we shoot on the Warner Brothers lot on all the classic New York street sets, and then we, with visual effects, we strip off all of the skins and surfaces of the buildings and then replace them with the old Coca-Cola ads and the Camel smoking ads. Everything from back in the day.
Wow.
That process is being done in parallel while we're shooting. So by the spring, we expect to have the film at festivals and out there for everyone.
Wow, that gotta be a tremendous and very, hard, and very strategic work, because recreating, New York at the time where Vanessa was living in the city, and it gotta be such I should say very challenging work to recreate that. Do you find sometimes in this part of production when you're like, wow, I don't know if we're going to be able to accomplish this, but we're going to give it a shot? Do you really feel sometimes that is, or you feel that in your career is being like that most of the time, and let's push the limit. Let's see if we can get it. And you finally get it, because recreating that, it gotta be just, a work by itself.
It comes back to having a really strong team. Our visual effects supervisor, a guy named Brian Greenberg, is, really, really expert in guiding us through that. And the houses, the post-production and visual effects houses that he's working with, really, really are devoted to kind of realizing the vision that we're all sort of striving for. And at the end of the day, if it fails miserably, hey, at least we tried. We're in no worse shape than if we didn't try at all. So we have high hopes that we're, trying to create an aesthetic that is not typically seen. And one of the highlights for me is anytime I've ever seen a film from the 70s, let's say, it's always, in my opinion, depicted as aged and very warm. They put effects on it to make it look like the footage has been sitting in a closet in the water for 40 years. It's got that kind of distressed kind of look. I'm trying to create an aesthetic that says, well, if we had our Alexa, 4K camera or 6K camera, if we had an Alexa, and back in the 70s, how eye-popping and vibrant and saturated would that be? How exciting and riveting would it be? Not unlike what we tried to do, for instance, with the aesthetics of Mudvayne's Dig. Just make it really eye-popping and super saturated and as wild and as exciting as the players who were in that world at the time have conveyed to me in my interviews with them. And I've talked to over 40 of the players from back in the day, and they all just said what a wild ride it was in Times Square back in the day. And so why shouldn't this visual effects model and why shouldn't the aesthetic of it look as eye-popping as it probably was back then? And we do that with the technology that's available to us, and not tone it down and not make it look like that. Make it look really, really vibrant.
Yeah, really real at the end of the day, and that's what have identified you all around your amazing and truly inspiring career as a director. Thomas, we're definitely closing the interview, but what message you would like to give to all the audience and people that they have admired your work, your career, and that they definitely gonna be watching the Latin of Manhattan? The microphone is yours. What message you would like to send to everyone listening to the show?
Well, I guess the one thing that was instilled in me at a very early age is, whatever your aspirations are, whatever story is kind of really in your heart, passionately in your heart, to just try to realize that, to tell it, if you're a storyteller, as like a filmmaker or a musician or a fashion designer or whatever, to just be as authentic and tell your tell your story with as much originality as you can, in order to truly differentiate your voice, that what makes you special and different. And if you just follow that without any care about what convention is. I think people are very, audiences are very savvy nowadays, and I think they really respond well to things that just touch an emotional chord in their souls and hearts, and that doesn't necessarily follow the same old, same old.
That's a great advice, and I think that's been the key in your career, and you didn't take the comfortable way, so you took maybe the more creative way, and you've been very successful because you have the passion for it. Thomas, I cannot thank you enough for just taking this valuable time of yours, to speak with us here in Dialogo. I know that the audience will appreciate a lot this interview, this dialogue that we had about your career, the Latin of Manhattan, that it's your most recent work that you're gonna be showing to the world, and with this tremendous cast of Jesse Metcalf, S.I. Morales, Drea Di Matteo, Terry Manning, David Proval, Elizabeth Rodriguez, and Vivian Lamoli. I really definitely am looking forward, and everyone should be looking forward to this amazing work of the Latin of Manhattan, directed by this amazing director, Thomas Mignone. Thomas, again, thank you so much for taking the time. This is your house. Whenever you want, you can come here and promote all your projects, and we really are looking forward to see this amazing piece of work, like every single piece of work that you have created. And we respect you, and we definitely appreciate what you have done for the music business, for the movie business, and for all the fans of your work.
Thank you, Luis. That's really, really nice. And please know that anytime you're in the LA area, come down to our sets. You'll be a VIP welcome guest. It was really fun chatting with you. I loved how you were able to touch on all these vital points, and it was really, really a pleasure to converse with you.
It was a tremendous pleasure to have Thomas Mignone, the amazing director of music videos and feature films, in Dialogo with Luis Otero. And I really appreciate all of you taking the time to listen to this amazing episode that we had. Please follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Dialogo con Otero. And again, really thankful for all of you guys for taking the time to listen to the amazing podcast. I look forward to see you guys in the next episode of Dialogo with Luis Otero.